Power, speed, maneuverability, action, adventure, romance. In this Ultimate Flight Special, Warbirds and the men and women who keep them flying. Why do people fly, restore, and preserve warbirds? And what makes an aircraft a personal favorite? The answers are as diverse as the personalities in these cockpits, as different as the hundreds of aircraft we'll see during the next hour. Some care for vintage military aircraft out of a sense of responsibility, an obligation to keep a very important page of history alive. Some see it as a duty to honor people who understood the cause of freedom to be so important they were willing to sacrifice their lives. Make no mistake, it's more than just a rewarding pursuit. These men and women don't hide the fact that flying warbirds, restoring and caring for them, even standing on the flight line during an air show, is fun too. Who wouldn't want to hop into a vintage fighting machine and pretend they're America's ace of aces, Dick Bong, or Jackie Cochran, or Jimmy Doolittle? A warbird enthusiast displays a subtle mixture of reverence and playfulness. This combination adds even greater mystique to what have become so much more than merely military aircraft to many people. We've sampled the wide variety of aircraft. When we come back, how did this fleet of military planes, an inventory larger than some countries' air forces, come under the protection of civilian owners? Later, we'll journey to a regional warbird fly-in and visit the largest annual gathering of warbirds in the world, the EAA Fly-In Convention in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Along the way, we'll take a look at a unique art form, fly formation with living legends of World War II, and even share tips on how to keep your airplane running smoothly. Stay with us.
And the day arrived when a huge 8th Air Force bomber mission with full fighter escort was flown to Berlin and back without a challenge by a single enemy fighter.
Most warbirders start here, immersed in the past, either as part of history or as students of it. The duty and tradition of military service often leave a lasting impression on the warbird enthusiast. Many original warbird enthusiasts played an active role in the conflict as pilots, ground crew, or even as boy and girl scouts who helped gather scrap metal to beat the Axis. Later generations' interest was stimulated by listening to tales of the war told by family and friends, or by just absorbing a lot of old war movies.
You might add to that there are two 20-millimeter cannons mounted one in each wing, probably Swiss Oerlikon guns. Yes, sir.
Both the veteran and the pupil share familiar traits. They build models of P-51s, regard Doolittle and Bong and Boyington as heroes, and can tell you exactly how many B-17s were built. This rich historical background, the greatest leap in aviation technology ever, occurred quite simply because it had to if the Allies were to win the war. New workable ideas sprang up daily and were put into practice as quickly but efficiently as possible. The P-51 was one of these ideas. It went from the basic concept to finished prototype in 117 days. The Army Air Corps inventory was less than 2,000 planes in 1938. By the end of the war, 296,429 airplanes had been built. Pilots were trained quickly, often entering combat with only a few hundred hours of instruction. Race and gender barriers began to break because the war effort required everyone's help, from WASPs to Tuskegee Airmen. The walls weren't pulled down as quickly as we might have wished, but the cracks were there. Air warfare, a novelty during the early stages of the First World War, was now a vital part of military strategy. The side that ruled the sky would win the war. As the conflict drew to a close, both the Allies and the Axis turned science fiction into fact by developing practical jet engines.
Go on again.
After the war, America had more important things to worry about than what to do with outdated propeller aircraft. The inventory was so large and the expense of ferrying it back to the United States so huge that most planes never made it home. Warbirds were pushed off cliffs, and aircraft carriers were buried, cut apart for scrap, or even blown up. Some survived and were put back into active service in the next war, or in the air forces of countries north and south of America's borders. A few came home to rotten boneyards. Fewer still were placed in operational service for fire suppression, aerial mapping, cloud seeding, crop dusting, or as executive transport. Most are gone forever. Of the original 15,686 P-51s, only 295 remain today, less than 2%. And about half that number are non-flying museum pieces in storage or are airframes currently under restoration. Like the surplus Curtiss Jennies of the previous war, some of the survivors were offered for sale to private individuals. Stories arose of pilots purchasing Warbirds containing full tanks of gas, then selling the gas for more money than they had paid for the airplane. One legend has it that a pilot attempted to take off in a B-17 after he purchased it from a military boneyard, ground looped it, and was told to just go ahead and take another one. As you might guess, these aircraft proved good investments. A P-51 purchased for less than $1,000 after the war can be worth more than $750,000 today. These powerful but precious machines, now in the hands of people who would care for them, began to be seen at air races and air shows. A loose affiliation of owners began to swap parts and form a network of military aircraft enthusiasts. Regional groups sprang up, such as the Confederate Air Force. And P-51 Mustang owners began to attend the Experimental Aircraft Association's annual flying convention as a group during the early 1960s. But no national organization existed to serve the needs of all warbirders. By the mid-60s, a group calling itself the Warbirds of America attempted to fill the void, but it wasn't until 1967, when the group became a division of EAA, that the organization started on the road to becoming the successful entity it is today. The initial goal of the group was to promote flight safety and keep aircraft that were already airworthy in the sky. But as the organization grew, EAA's Warbirds of America became increasingly dedicated to the preservation of all vintage military aircraft, not just as museum pieces or as toys for a lucky few, but as flying tributes to an important era. The group held true to the motto, "Keep 'em flying." Through the years, their scope expanded from their World War II roots, and today the Warbirds of America include aircraft from the First World War, as well as from Korea and Vietnam, and aircraft of foreign military branches. As the demand for Warbirds increased, the operational supply dwindled. Boneyards were also picked clean. When Keep 'em Flying returns, we'll see that not all Warbirds come from these sources.
The Eagle has claws in the Fighting Cloud Corps of America's Air Army, a sky-high battalion of battlebirds built to go faster, farther, and fancier than any flying fleet in the world. Vital to our nation's defense are the roaring squadrons of America's mobile Maginot Line, the United States Air Corps.
As the supply of Warbirds peaked, owners began to sell and trade their treasures among themselves, or purchase from and sell to museums and organizations. Current Warbirds of America President Jack Harrington bought this T-34 Mentor as a partial restoration. He has since resold it to yet another enthusiast. The last airworthy short Sunderland flying boat was purchased by owner and pilot Kermit Weeks in the early 1990s. The Sunderland spent the previous decade in Chatham, England, where the original prototype flew in 1937. The four-engine British patrol bomber served 3 countries during World War II. Sunderland searched for enemy submarines and were equipped with 13 guns, depth charges, and room for some of the comforts of home. The airplane was placed in storage until 1952, when it was sold to the Royal New Zealand Air Force along with 15 other Sunderlands to be used for transport and surveillance missions. It served as a passenger airplane and as part of an English air museum. The Sunderland currently resides in Weeks' own museum, the Fantasy of Flight Aviation Park in Florida.
Our trip to bring the airplane over was very interesting. We made stops in a lock in Central Ireland. We went on to Reykjavik, Iceland, where we were weathered in for 4 days because of bad weather in Canada. We flew across the southern tip of Greenland, went to Goose Bay, Canada, and one stop in Toronto.
This 1948 Lockheed Constellation was once owned by actor John Travolta. The humpbacked 4-engine airplane started life as a military transport and was later used as an aerial sprayer until Travolta purchased the aircraft in 1984. Like the Sunderland, many military Connies were converted to passenger planes during the 1950s. The fuselage of this Connie is painted in the colors of the Military Air Transport Service and is currently owned by Vern Rayburn. Because the supply of authentic warbirds is finite, enthusiasts have found increasingly creative means of procuring one. Often the challenge of salvaging a warbird is the driving force for an owner. To rescue a piece of history from the brink of oblivion becomes the ultimate reward. Sometimes you have to literally dig deep for your treasure. On July 15, 1942, 2 B-17s and a half-dozen P-38s left Greenland for delivery to England. Bad weather and a misleading radio transmission forced the group to land in southeastern Greenland, 10 miles from the coast. All 25 crew members were rescued, but the aircraft, 7 of which had sustained only minor damage, were abandoned. Almost 50 years later, the so-called Lost Squadron was finally located, buried under almost 250 feet of snow and ice. Aviation Service owner Pat Epps and architect Richard Taylor formed the Greenland Expedition Society and dedicated themselves to saving the squadron. A specially constructed device melted an access shaft to a depth equal to the height of a 20-story building to reach one of the B-17s. Unfortunately, the shifting ice had crushed the aircraft. A new shaft was sunk to one of the P-38s, which proved to be in better condition.
Here in the tent, we have as much of the fighter plane as we could put in the DC-3 cargo plane. And this was loaded up last Monday from the ice cap and flown directly here to Oshkosh. So we only have one engine. The other engine is in Greenland. We have both booms and the rudder assemblies, one wing panel. The rest in the center section, the most important section, has just been brought up to the ice cap, to the surface of the ice cap, and it's now retrievable. So we have perhaps 40% of the aircraft here.
To date, one complete P-38 has been salvaged and is in the process of being reconstructed. Instead of burrowing through ice, Dick Hansen had to dive under the surface of Lake Michigan to claim his prize, an F-4F Wildcat. Hansen also owns a P-40, which he rescued from on top of a post above a gas station. Another option is to construct your own military aircraft. As warbirds become more and more scarce, replicas have become a growing phenomenon. Ralph Rosanek built his Curtiss P-6E Hawk from scratch, using original blueprints.
Well, from the time I was a kid, back in the late 20s and early 30s, when the P-6E first came out, I built models of it, and I became enamored with it. And then when I was in the Peacetime Air Corps in 1938, 39, and 40, I saw my first P-6E in 1938 at Chinook Field where I was stationed. And I just fell in love with it, and I thought someday I'm going to have one of these.
A subcategory of replicas are scale replicas, a crossover into the popular home-built aircraft movement. When Keep 'em Flying returns, we'll find that whatever their backgrounds, when two or more warbirds get together, it's a reason to celebrate. Local warbird fly-ins, right after this.
The climax in a man's training comes when he is ready to solo. There can be no greater thrill for a man than to feel himself at the controls of one of these super-powered ships, sending it soaring, diving, obeying his every command. And it is just as great a thrill for the men of the ground crew. For behind every pilot, behind every ship that takes to the air, is the skill, industry, and devotion of the heroes on the ground, without whose aid it would be impossible to keep 'em flying.
P-51 Mustang. B-17 Flying Fortress. Clinical designations paired with colorful nicknames. They roll off the tongue and evoke feelings that are hard to put into words. The names, like the machines, are part science and part alchemy. Nowhere is this more vividly brought home than where there are lots of warbirds. Welcome to a local warbirds meet. It's a chance to get together informally, swap stories, do a little flying, and drool over each other's airplanes. One thing's for certain, even when the pilots aren't in the air, their thoughts are still on their machines.
Everybody here wants to share their pride and joy. I think it kind of borders like on the antique car shows. They take it to a show. They like for you to see it and remember the way it was back in the 50s, the 40s, what have you. There's a little bit of difference here. I've been to a lot of car shows, and I've never seen some of the motors run. But if you go like we're here, there's no one here static. There's nothing here parked and wipe on it all weekend. You're going to smell oil. You're going to see oil. You're going to smell gasoline being burnt. You're going to hear gasoline being turned into noise. In a lot of cases, the fellas have second seats, and they'll take riders and the volunteers with them. So you also get to share the airplane with you, and that's the payoff.
These are T-34 trainers, and they were built by the Navy in the 1950s after World War II, specifically for trainers, and have been used for trainers for many years. And they originally had 225 horsepower engines, and we've upgraded both of these to 300. We originally just had the first one, DB, and then I took it away from John, so he had to find another one.
It's like bringing a ghost back, and if you like working puzzles. Well, the beauty part about an airplane, you search for hours and hours and hours looking for a spare part that someone may have at home. In a lot of cases, you're having to make new parts or have them made. So consequently, we ended up with a lot more of these airplanes back flying again.
This is a TBM Avenger. It's built by Grumman. It was a torpedo bomber initially in World War II, and then they actually changed most of them to glide bombers. This is the kind of airplane that George Bush was flying when he got shot down in World War II. He was went into operational with this. They had a crew of 3, pilot, bombardier navigator, a bombardier tail stinger gunner combination, and then a turret gunner, which is back there in the back. And we've had this for about a year or so.
The T6 was a trainer, and all the guys that would have flown this in World War II would have had to train on the T6, which was an advanced trainer. And the old saying was, if you could fly the T6, you could fly anything, and it's true. T6 is much harder on any given day to land in a ground handle than the Avenger is.
I raced it last year at Reno. Ended up 5th in the silver, which is pretty good for a first-timer. That's what we all thought anyway.
Oh, yeah.
So that was great. My husband's going to race it this next year, you know, the double owner thing, so we gotta share. It is the greatest thing I've ever done in an airplane. It really is. It is so much fun. I don't know, you know, maybe down the line we'll get in the Unlimiteds or something if we can, you know, afford it. That's the worst part. Right now, T6s are just so much fun because, I don't know, when you're racing T6s, the field is so close because the airplanes are basically stock T6s as opposed to the, you know, modified P-51s and everything in the Unlimited. So the T6s are a lot of fun because it's a closer race. So, who knows? Maybe win the gold someday.
Welcome back to the Lebanon, Tennessee Warbirds Weekend. You never know who'll show an interest in warbirds, especially when your local fly-in is in the immediate vicinity of Nashville.
I didn't used to fly at all, and a friend of mine's got a 1960 Bonanza, and he carried me flying one day, and the bug bit me, and so I started hanging around Lebanon here, and I was going to buy me an airplane, which I did. My first airplane I bought was a Turbo Arrow, and I flew that for about 6 months, and I got a twin Comanche, and I flew that for a while, and then I ended up with this Baron behind me here. And so, like John said, I'll fly that till it gets dirty, then I'll get something else.
Not all warbirds hail from the World War II era. Some, like the Mustang and Corsair, were used in subsequent wars. Others, like this Sky Raider, first served during Korea and lasted through the Vietnam conflict.
Well, the Sky Raider was originally designed to replace the Dauntless dive bomber at the end of World War II, but it didn't really see service in World War II. It wasn't really provided to the fleet until '46. But the aircraft saw extensive action in Korea. It was used heavily as a dive bomber and for ground support in Korea. And then, most interestingly from my perspective, is that the aircraft was used extensively in Vietnam. Initially was brought to Vietnam to train and to be used by the South Vietnamese Air Force. But it became a real mainstay for ground support for the American forces. And was used extensively for pilot rescue, both in South and in North Vietnam. This particular airplane actually came out of North Africa. It was sitting in a field in Chad, North Africa, where it was abandoned by the French after they fought a war there in about 1976 against Libyan forces that were trying to invade Chad. Now, it turns out that most of the Sky Raiders were either lost in Vietnam or given to the South Vietnamese Air Force when we left. And so there are very few Sky Raiders left flying in the world, only about, I believe, about 17 or 18 total, and only about 9 flying in this country and 3 in Europe. It has an Aero Products 4-bladed prop, which is a steel prop, and they're pretty scarce, hard to come by nowadays. Parts are somewhat of a difficulty, as with most antique aircraft. Most of the parts of this airplane were shipped to Vietnam to support our forces there in the early 70s, and there's very little available. The way you do it is you kind of get to know who has parts and which people around the country have things that you need, and many times I'll have a few parts that somebody else will need, and they'll call me and we'll share. So you kind of get to know your individual suppliers and sources, and sometimes you have to make the parts.
The aircraft stayed operational into the 60s, and in some countries even into the 70s before they were finally, replaced by jets. This particular airplane was surplused out. It had been a Marine airplane, it was my understanding, and it was bought by a fellow named Bob Bean out in Arizona and sat there for several years and was purchased. Connie Edwards got it, and Connie kept it for a number of years. Then he donated it to the EAA about 10 or 12 years ago.
They were carrier airplanes. The Marine Corps also flew them. Actually, the Marine Corps sort of made them famous. This airplane in particular is one of the airplanes that flew in the TV series Bob Black Sheep. It also flew off the USS Boxer during the Korean War. Everything on the airplane's hydraulic, which at that time was sort of state-of-the-art, kind of like transistors are now in computers. And it requires a little tweaking here and there, but it's really not that bad. It's kind of pretty, it's actually pretty simple. There's just a lot of it.
One of the questions that's always asked is, why does the Corsair have bent wings? And if you look at it, it is weird. There are not any inverted gull-wing fighters like that. But there's a very good reason for it. There's two good reasons for it. They found that a mid-wing airplane, where the wing comes out perpendicular to the surface of the fuselage, is the least induced drag for the fuselage-wing combination. So, but if you put the wing up to where it's a mid-wing airplane, then the gear has to be miles long to get down to the ground. That's why Bearcat has such long gear. Well, they really didn't want a long, spindly gear with a big, heavy airplane coming on board the boat. So they figured out that they could make the wing, as you can see on that one, the wing is perpendicular to the skin of the airplane, so it reduces drag, but then it comes down and then goes back up. The other story that's been told was that when they designed it and looked at the visibility out of it, that with a mid-wing, the visibility would be very poor coming on board the boat, whereas the V gives you a perfect view of the landing platform as you roll out on final. Those are the two stories.
Next, two words say it all: Warbirds and Oshkosh. A trip to the center of the sport aviation universe when Keep 'em Flying returns. Welcome back to Keep 'em Flying and to the world's premier aviation event, EAA's annual fly-in convention. To say Oshkosh is to say it all. If you enjoy any aspect of aviation, this city in east central Wisconsin is your destination every summer. Each afternoon, the convention hosts the world's greatest air show. A big part of that air show is devoted to the aptly named Warbirds Spectacular. This is formation flying at its best. At any given time, 100 warbirds may be in the sky. Air shows aren't the only venues for warbird performances. Some warbirds are more at home as air racers or record breakers. Even when warbirds are safely on the ground, there's still plenty to admire. The precision restorations, the authentic paint schemes, and of course, the beautiful nose art. On the other side of the commercial break, Keep 'em Flying talks to some of the heroes of World War II.
Wherever men fly the Flying Fortress, there must be skilled mechanics to care for the ship to assure its maximum performance. These mechanics must be trained in the Flying Fortress School or be fitted by practical field work to meet all necessary qualifications.
If you think you can find VIPs at a local warbird fly-in, imagine who you can rub elbows with at the greatest aviation event on Earth. After all these years and all the airplanes you've flown so well, what's your favorite one to fly?
Well, I probably, for nostalgia reasons, I like to get back in the old P-51 that I shot down Germans with, and yeah, I've been flying it since '44, and it's fun, but it's a tail dragger and it's hard to fly, and it's a challenge. And see the difference between F-15s, F-16s, and modern airplanes. They're extremely easy to fly, and you get complacent in them. And I crawled back in a P-51, man. I said, Jaeger, be careful.
Some of the celebrities might not be recognizable to the general public, but to convention goers, they're one of the main reasons to make the trip to Oshkosh.
Here a couple of years ago, Jack Roush bought a Mustang. He decided to paint it in the colors, the very colors of the P-51 that I flew during World War II. This very old crow that you're looking at right here behind. People, I go to an air show and get to fly this wonderful airplane, and people say, well, are you having fun? And I say, you got to be kidding to ask me that question.
Every kid, when he was little, built a model of a B-17. It was one of the most famous airplanes in the world, and has become one of the most productive bombers, if you can use that term. And it's something that a lot of people have never seen. They hear about a B-17. There's only 12 of them left flying at the present time. As it stands right now, I'm the last combat pilot, still current in the airplane left flying in the world. And of course, it's just between God and good health and the flight surgeons and all my good friends that have kept me in that position, and of course the opportunity that the EAA has given me to be able to fly the aircraft.
The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress was quite a departure for its day. At a time when most of the world's bombers were smaller, twin-engine aircraft that barely matched the performance of civil transports, the B-17 proved that a four-engine airplane didn't have to be sluggish and ineffective. The prototype was first rolled out in June 1935. It was dubbed the Flying Fortress by a Seattle newspaper reporter, and although small by today's standards, it was one of the largest airplanes used during World War II. The soldiers of the Axis and the Allied powers have had a long time to heal. A half-century has passed, and former enemies embrace each other and show respect for the killing machines in which they fought in the sky. Next on Keep 'em Flying, they're worth their weight in gold. Aircraft of our allies and our enemies, replicas and restorations, nose art and paint schemes, air shows and formation flying. We've covered a lot of territory during this program, but what would any warbird gathering be if there weren't one or two of the rarest of the rare, warbirds of which less than a dozen exist in flyable condition? It's the most prevalent of all warbirds and the most desirable. America's greatest piston engine fighter was first designed for British use. Originally to be named the Apache, the designation was changed to Mustang before the first 2 test aircraft were delivered to Britain in late 1941. The U.S. began producing Mustangs for Army Air Force use in 1942, and by early 1944, production was 1 aircraft every 66 minutes. A list of the Mustang's accomplishments is an impressive resume of wartime service. It was the first European-based Allied aircraft to cross into the airspace of the German frontier. It was the first escort fighter to accompany a bombing raid to Berlin. P-51s on the European front flew more than 1 million hours and were responsible for almost half of the enemy's losses. More than 9,000 aircraft on the ground and in the air.
We've had the airplane in our collection about 18, 19 years, and it is really a fine machine. I had the privilege of flying during World War II and during the Korean conflict, and I feel very fortunate to still at this time of life fly a real good airplane that's so popular with so many enthusiasts.
Hard to put into words about this unique group of people. A lot of people own a lot of different airplanes, and they're very gracious to take them out to air shows or to take them to a reunion of the guys that flew them in World War II, and that's probably the highlight of what we do, is when you go into somewhere and the guys walk up and say, wow, last time I saw the P-51, it was escorting my bomber.
From my perspective, this is flying history. This is our nation's heritage.
Even though they're 50 years old, you know, we maintain them constantly. We do more maintenance on these than most guys in general aviation do. But they're great to see in a museum, but for somebody to really enjoy it, they got to hear it and feel it when it goes by. There's just nothing quite like it.
To keep these airplanes flying, it's so important because they're definitely a part of our history, and to realize how far aviation has come, it's fantastic.
There's always going to be museums, and the museum is going to be sitting there, and you're going to look at a cold figure. Our motto in Warbirds has always been for 30-something years is to keep them flying. One of these days, if things go like they have in the past, the whole thing could be silent.
Sooner or later, the last radial engine will come to a stop. I mean, it will. We know that. But I don't see any reason that we have to give in easily.